Record the meeting. So I've just clicked the button and all of our proceedings today will be available on our website at a future date. We haven't quite figured the process for getting those recordings to you, but you will be able to revisit this conversation as you need. My name is Chad Buterbaugh, and I'm here with Derek Avedo we're both at the Maryland State Arts Council. I am the state folklorist. Derek is the office secretary here at MSAC, and we are your guides, presenters over the next hour or so. And if you are here to learn about the Maryland Folklife Network, you're in the right place. That's our subject today. We're going to be talking about this grant program, which is our newest grant program at MSAC. And before I go any further, I would ask you to look at your webinar controls and look for the chat box function. Just want to confirm that the people who are currently logged in can hear. So just type in yes or okay or everything's all right, and let us know that the transmission is coming through. Okay, getting positives, great. Fabulous, thank you. I think that's just about everybody. We had 26 registered for the webinar. We'll see just how many show up. Because we do have that larger number, we're going to communicate exclusively through the chat box rather than through microphones, because it can get real muddy real fast. You know, when someone's opening their Snickers bar, it can sort of derail the entire proceedings. So here's our agenda. We just have 4 major points today. We're going to go over a couple of Zoom instructions. Zoom is our webinar platform, just to get you familiar with the functionality. I will tell you a little bit about the history of the work that is now being called the Folklife Network, as well as the vision for the Folklife Network, where we'd like to go in the future. And we're really going to spend most of our times going over the grant guidelines for the Folklife Network, because this webinar is primarily intended to benefit folks who are potential applicants for that funding. I know that we have some folks on the phone or on the webinar from out of state, and I'm super glad you're here. First of all, glad you're interested, and look forward to catching up with you afterward about any questions you might have, but this is primarily to go through the guidelines and answer any questions to our friends here in Maryland. And then we'll wrap up with some question and answer at the end. So we've kind of already done the audio test. It sounds like everything is working fine, but if you are in a moment where you've got to restart or something stops working for you, just bear in mind that the little headphones icon is where you can go to restart your audio, and you will have various selections on the drop-down menu based on your computer's functionality. And as I said, the chat box is going to be our primary means of communication. So write into Derek, who is really controlling the chat box, with your technological questions, or something's not working, just let him know what's going on. And then also put your questions into the chat box. You know, keep a log of what interests you throughout the presentation, and just let us know what you would like to discuss or have me answer, etc. My plan is to stop at various points throughout the webinar just to take questions if there are any, as well as I said, to do several minutes of Q&A at the end. The chat box has public and private functionality, so if you want to ask a broad content question, you could probably use the public function. But if you have a tech question, I would recommend going private so that we don't muddy the water too much, so to speak. All right, here we go. The history of what is now the Folklife Network goes back to the beginning of our Folklife program. In Maryland, our Folklife program is called Maryland Traditions. It is our mission to support community-based living cultural traditions handed down by example or word of mouth. And when our staff folklorists back in 2001 started Maryland Traditions, they found some funding to support folklife activities occurring in different parts of the state. So there were organizations that were getting an annual grant to do things like folklife festivals, folklife research, folklife education, but that granting program was pretty informal. It was coming out of the Arts Council's discretionary funds, and they were continuing grants, but on the other hand, it was also sometimes maybe not totally clear what the boundaries and guidelines of that program were. So in 2017, the State Arts Council commissioned a feasibility study it was really to look at the possibility of a Maryland Folklife Center but that feasibility study came back with several recommendations, one of which was to kind of stabilize, grow, and strengthen a Folklife Network, something that would fund regional Folklife centers around the state. So we took the existing momentum of the old partnerships, we took that recommendation from the feasibility study, and in 2019 we created the Folklife Network. That is a formalized granting program that has been built based on public input, as well as the support and approval of our staff, board, and the State Attorney General's office. So that's kind of where we sit. This is a little map of the state showing you where our current regional Folklife centers exist. Well, first of all, that's the State Arts Council with the red star. And we have 5 current regional Folklife centers with the yellow stars. We might as well read them out. You can see my little cursor circling Frostburg State University. Right now, Regional Folklife Center going back to 2004. This is University of Maryland, Baltimore County, Regional Folklife Center going back to 2011, I believe. Down here closer to DC, that's the Sandy Spring Museum. That relationship goes back, I want to say 2014. This is St. Mary's College of Maryland in Southern Maryland. They just go back to 2018. And then down here on the Lower Eastern Shore is the Word Museum of Wildfowl Art. So those are our 5 regional Folklife centers, and we have funding in fiscal 2021 to support 3 more regional Folklife centers, and those are indicated in the regions with the green stars there. This region here, we have funding to support 1 Folklife center in the region encompassing Carroll, Howard, and Frederick counties. We have funding to support here a regional Folklife center in Baltimore City. And then we have funding to support a regional Folklife center on, we're calling it the Upper Eastern Shore. That encompasses Caroline, Cecil, Kent, Queen Anne's, and Talbot counties. So our purpose here is really to grow and stabilize what is essentially a statewide Folklife infrastructure. We want these regional Folklife centers to serve as resources for their area, to be places that artists can come to learn more about the traditional arts, to be places that cultural workers can come to participate in programming or maybe even help to plan programming. We are hopeful that we will see some fieldwork documentation coming out of these fieldwork regional Folklife centers. We also are encouraging each regional Folklife center to develop their own local partnerships. So the idea is that the Arts Council is going to be supporting each of these with a continuing grant, but with a continuing grant to an individual organization, but that those organizations are free to develop lateral partnerships in their own region, if that serves them. With the idea being that that could be a way to pool resources, whether that's expertise or financial resources, or other ways of bringing constituents together. So let me pause there to see if there are any questions. I'll give you a moment to write in. Okay, on we go. So this program is modeled after another Arts Council program called the Community Arts Development Program. That is the program that gets funding to our county arts councils, plus our Baltimore City Arts Council. Of course, there can't be more than 1 county arts council in each county around the state. The idea is the same with the Folklife Network. We want to establish 8 regional Folklife centers with the idea that each of them is going to be serving in their area. And it's also just a basic dollars and cents issues. We unfortunately don't have funding right now to support 24 regional Folklife centers in the state of Maryland to match each of our jurisdictions, just 8 at the time being. So that's our goal for the next year. And the idea in the long term is that these would be strong, lasting relationships, just like the Arts Council has with the county arts councils, with the relationship the State Arts Council has with the county arts councils. So once a regional Folklife center begins to serve in that capacity, the grant is continuous, and they are basically the resource center for their region. The funding comes through each year, assuming that the regional Folklife center continues to do good work and continues to receive strong panelist favorable ratings from panelists during the review process. Okay. Any questions, Derek? Okay. So we'll just charge along. So we're going to go into the grant guidelines section of our presentation. I want to point out that you can read the grant guidelines, download them, you know, take them on a long road trip for pleasure reading by going to this section of our website and just downloading the PDF. It's a 14-page document. It goes through everything that I'm going through today in fairly great detail. So do keep that website in mind. This is an example of a Puerto Rican percussion and dance workshop hosted recently at our Montgomery County Regional Folklife Center. That's the Sandy Spring Museum. This was sort of a match made in heaven between the Howard County-based Cultura Planera and the Montgomery County-based Sandy Spring Museum. They've been doing wonderful work together for about 1.5 years now. I do want to call out too that Sandy Spring Museum earlier this week had a small fire in their facility. So do take a moment to visit their website and just check into how they're doing. And, you know, there are ways that you can support them. So just check them out and, you know, check up on them, make sure they're doing okay. It was a small fire and none of the collection was damaged and nobody was harmed, but still. We have a question.
Is the Folklife Network a new name for Maryland traditions or an overlay on top of Maryland traditions?
That's a great question. The question is about terminology. Does Maryland Traditions equal the Folklife Network? No, it does not. The name of the overarching state folklife program will continue to be Maryland Traditions, just as it has been since 2001. The Folklife Network is a new program of Maryland Traditions. Maryland Traditions also has 2 other granting programs, the Folklife Apprenticeship and the Heritage Award, both of which are aimed primarily at individual folklife artists. The Folklife Network is a program that's aimed mainly at organizations. And this is with the intention of creating spaces, essentially, where those folklife artists can really have a home, you know, have a place to go to. Great question, thank you. Okay, so the description of the Folklife Network, and again, I'm really leaning pretty heavily on the grant guidelines document right now. So this is continuous funding for organizations serving as regional folklife centers, and we are mindful that organizations have their own missions. Organizations have their own identities, their own ways of doing things, their own goals and visions. So what we really want to do is find that happy intersection where Folklife Network funding is actually serving the existing mission of the grantees and complementing the mission of Maryland Traditions and the State Arts Council. So fortunately for our potential grantees, our missions are pretty broad here at the Arts Council. I can recite the Maryland Traditions one right now. So our purpose is to identify, document, present, and support folklife. So that's pretty broad. Whether you're doing primarily fieldwork documentation, or you're putting on performances, or you're doing education, or, you know, in the example of a higher education institution, maybe you're taking people out into the community to meet folklife artists or identify new folklife artists. That all fits within the Maryland Traditions mission. And we also, based on our emergent MSAC strategic plan, want to make sure that the work that we're funding through the Folklife Network is supporting equity, diversity, and inclusion. Derek and I and the rest of the staff were just in a training today on this subject, and a really compelling point is that equity, diversity, and inclusion work is in many ways marked by non-closure. So it's sort of a moving target in a lot of ways, but I think that we can generally understand equity, diversity, and inclusion as human-centered ways of doing business, of doing arts administration, and recognizing that our perspectives are myriad and there needs to be space made for those. So there's your quick description of the Folklife Network. Any questions coming through, Derek? Okay. Who is eligible to apply for a Folklife Network grant? Well, first of all, you've got to be located in Maryland, so that's probably an obvious point. But we primarily grant to, here at the Arts Council, Maryland incorporated nonprofit organizations, Maryland colleges and universities, and Maryland units of government. The vast majority of our grantees are nonprofits, but the higher education institutions also appear pretty regularly on our lists of grantees. The caveat with colleges and universities is that we at the Arts Council really only tend to fund activities that are benefiting the general public. So if there's an application coming from a college or a university that's kind of funding like more, classroom-based curricular activities, we don't really, that's not a strong application. If on the other hand, we get an application from a college or university that says, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to take some students out into the community to do some research, and we're going to host a public convening of community members in the neighborhood to talk about that work and to share concerns and ideas, that would be a stronger type of proposal. And finally, we do fund units of government. So if there is a city or a town or even a county that wanted to attempt to acquire some Folklife Network funds, that would be very much inbounds. Okay. So as I mentioned earlier, the Folklife Network exists in a certain capacity throughout the state already with our 5 current centers. Our 3 new regional Folklife centers are going to exist in these 3 places. So I'll just kind of leave this slide up for a second for you to absorb. I know we have some folks from Baltimore City on the call. I think we might have somebody from the Upper Shore on the call. Not sure about Mid-State. Now, one question that I've been getting occasionally as I kind of shop around this idea of the Folklife Network is, say I'm an organization located in Carroll County, and this Mid-State region is defined as 3 counties. Is the expectation that if I get Folklife Network funds, I suddenly have to expand my mission into Frederick and Howard counties? The answer is no. We wouldn't expect an organization to grow that dramatically just because they're getting a certain type of grant. But we needed to sort of geographically define where these regional Folklife centers were going in some regard. So that's what Mid-State equals for us. We can fund 1 center somewhere in that area. Some other questions that we regularly get is that, does this mean that I can only work with artists from Carroll, Frederick, or Howard counties? The answer to that is also no. In fact, we really want to encourage cross-region participation so that, if there's some fantastic artists from East Baltimore who wants to do some work in Westminster or somewhere in Carroll County, that's very much encouraged. Another typical question would be, are we needing to focus on artists from Maryland? That's a little bit of a stickier answer, but the answer is not necessarily. If there is an artist from out of state who is coming in to do some performances and that would fit within the regional Folklife Center work, then that would be fine. However, Folklife Network funds could not be used to support that person's travel. They could only go to support that person's arts activities that are happening in the state. So for example, if a band plays and the fee is $1,500, then that could be an allowable expense for the Folklife Network, but we can't spend money to help to get that band here from New Jersey or Colorado or wherever it may be. Okay, we'll just move on. So let's talk a little bit about the very exciting world of fiscal procedures. The Folklife Network is conceptualized as broadly supporting any folklife expenditures that an organization is making. Again, we're defining folklife as community-based living cultural traditions handed down by example or word of mouth. You know, the regular types of items that appear on that list would be traditional music, traditional dance, culinary traditions. There's also the category of occupational traditions. So in Maryland, that could mean making crab pots or weaving dredge nets or any number of occupations that are connected in some way to a generational cultural practice. Any way that that might take form, that would be an allowable expense. The Folklife Network funds are being offered at a 4-to-1 match. The grants are going to be between $10,000 and $50,000 per year per regional Folklife Center. And to be eligible for a $50,000 Folklife Network grant, an organization must demonstrate that they are spending a quarter of that amount already on Folklife activities. So that's $12,500 for a $50,000 grant, and you can kind of do the math from there. So the use of funds again, it's going to be a very broad list. Some of the very typical activities would be exhibitions, performances, festivals, workshops, lectures, field schools, oral histories, ethnographies, archiving, etc. Just to go over a couple of the less common items on this list, a field school refers to the idea to take a number of researchers out into the field or out into the community to do a little bit of research of their own. And typically in a field school setup, what we're doing is identifying community needs and using our expertise as folklorists or cultural workers to try and help meet those needs or to build awareness of what those needs are. I know we have somebody from the Ohio Arts Council on the phone right now, and I know that in Ohio, they're also doing great work at Ohio State University in terms of field schools. So, you know, there are any number of great examples that you can kind of research on your own. And ethnography is a folklore studies and cultural anthropology methodology. It means more or less the same thing on something of a solo basis. So if I'm going out to do this work alone, I'm completing an ethnography. Okay, moving on. Ask questions at any time. I'm kind of leaving these little silent periods at the end of the slides to give people time to type, but do interrupt at any time. Okay, how do we decide how much money an applicant gets? So again, it's a $10,000 to $50,000 grant every year, and the grant amounts are request-based. So the applicant tells us how much they want. I assume we'll probably be seeing a lot of $50,000 requests, but you never know. We just want to make sure that there's room for organizations to ask for what they want. And then every application is going to go through a review process where a panel of expert reviewers will review the quality of an application based on a stated rubric, and they will assign a numerical score. So we basically multiply the aggregate score by the amount of the request, and that's how much the grant becomes. This is similar really to all of our grants. This is not unusual at the Maryland State Arts Council in terms of how grant amounts are determined. Our panelists would be, you know, folklife artists, cultural workers, folklorists, people who are familiar with this work. The panelists too are chosen through a public application process. Okay. So what about the application? How do you do one? How are they logged and filed and reviewed? We have at the Arts Council this year moved to a new online application management system called Smart Simple. You can create a free Smart Simple account at our website, msac.org. And when Folklife applications go live later this winter, that's where they can be completed. So that's one piece. In the Smart Simple system, when you are creating your account for the first time, you will get a number of categories by which to identify yourself. So you can register in Smart Simple as an arts organization, as an individual artist, as, I don't know, I forget all of the various categories you can choose, but there are quite a few. And then based on that selection, the various grants for which you are eligible will automatically populate. So basically that's so that you're not seeing a bunch of stuff that doesn't apply to you. There are two types of applications for the Folklife Network. One is a full application, which is much longer and which is detailed and which includes a full bevy of questions asking the applicant to demonstrate their awareness of their community, what their mission is, what their planned folklife activities is, what the budget would be. And those full applications are the documents that are reviewed by our panelists. If an applicant submits 2 consecutive, very successful full applications, they'll then be placed on a 3-year funding cycle. And in the interim years of that 3-year funding cycle, they would be asked to submit a request for funding, or RFF. And RFF is basically a very abbreviated version of a full application. Another piece that we get a lot of questions about is how are funding amounts potentially different between full and RFF applications. So full applications are very important insofar as they determine what the grant amount will be throughout an RFF cycle. So if you submit a full application, you request $50,000, and let's say you get $47,000, and then you get placed on a 3-year cycle, then you're going to get $47,000 in the ensuing years. However, if as an organization you say to yourself, I feel like we could do better, next year we could get that full 50,000, you are very welcome to try for that, and you can elect to submit a full application again the next year. But just bear in mind that if you submit that second full application and you get a lower score, then that lower score is the one that's going to stand for your 3-year cycle. So, you know, I am here to help you with that as the state folklorist, and would encourage anyone with questions in that regard to reach out to me. And, you know, if there are any questions at the moment, please do ask, because this has been a big conversation topic. All right, well, I can literally hear the clock ticking on our end, so I'm going to go to the next slide. Our basic grant making process is here. I kind of touched on it a little bit earlier. We solicit panelists through a public application process. We bring them all together here at the Arts Council. It's an in-person meeting. The panelist selection piece is really wide open. So, you know, if you are a subscriber to our newsletter and media materials via email, you will see the alert for soliciting Folklife Network grant panelists a little bit later this winter. If you are not subscribed to our media communications, you can do that by emailing any one of us, any staff member, and in our signature lines, you will see mechanisms to subscribe. You can also subscribe directly through our website, msac.org. Another piece of the basic grant making process is that all of our grants require final reports. The Folklife Network final report will just be a kind of a short narrative description of how the money was spent, as well as a breakdown of how a numerical breakdown, a quantitative breakdown of how that money was spent. So grantees are notified with about 6 weeks of lead time regarding final reports, and you know they're not too very onerous. At least we hope they're not. And if they are, we encourage you to get in touch. You know, we're very open to hearing critical feedback. So if anything needs to change, then you know, in terms of the Folklife Network, I would be your point of contact. All right, so like we are really quickly now in the Q&A section, you know, I'm happy to hear from any one of you. My suspicion is that we probably have some individual artists on the line too, and most of this presentation was geared toward organizations. So if the individual artists have questions, please do ask them, or type them, I should say, and we'll just, we'll give you a little time to collect your thoughts and use the chat box.
Do network members need to have a designated representative? And do those reps need to have a background in folklife/folklore?
Yeah, that's a great question. Who's the point person for a Folklife Network grant, and also what's the expertise that's required? You know, is having a folklorist on staff going to be a benefit? Both great questions. Yes, as part of the Smart Simple application, we will ask for a point of grant contact. And I think that it's important for applicants to talk about upfront who has the capacity to be that person. Because the expectation is with Folklife Network grants that there's going to be a financial relationship. You know, money will be coming out of MSAC and going to the grantees, but there's also going to be a kind of a professional, almost collegial relationship where if you read the guidelines, you'll see that, you know, it's expected that that I, as the state folklorist, would be invited to 2 events per year, just to at your regional Folklife Center, just to understand what it is you're doing, and also to meet some of your constituents, to hear your needs. So make sure that your point of grant contact has the capacity to do that kind of work. And then in terms of the background in folklife and folklore, yeah, I mean, it's going to be helpful. If you have a degreed folklorist, there's an assumption that that person has undergone some training that you know, helps them kind of speak the language and understand the landscape of the work that we're trying to do, but it's in no way necessary. I don't want the Folklife Network to seem exclusive or as if we won't take any other kind of cultural worker. What we're really looking for in your application is a demonstration, A, that your organization knows, understands, and is responding to its community, and B, has staffed itself to accomplish that type of work. If you happen to be a folklore in that process, that's great. If you don't, it's not going to be a hindrance to you, just as long as you've got that expertise in some way.
Does the network meet/convene, and is there a requirement of time commitment to larger network?
There is no, okay, so since it's a network, are we having an annual meeting or something like that? I will tell you that there's currently nothing in the guidelines that requires that. However, in my work around the state with our existing centers, there has been a lot of desire to have something like that once a year. As I said earlier, very briefly, this Folklife Network program, it grew from public input. We had a number of public meetings last year, mainly in 2019, mainly in the spring and into the summer, where people just kind of sat around a table and said, you know, this is what I would want from a Folklife Network. Some of those people were actual current regional Folklife Center representatives. Others of them were artists, but those conversations were really vibrant. In some cases, you know, they got a little heated at times, but it was really helpful to get everyone in the same room and talk things over. So that's the long way of saying, you know, if everyone could make it to something like an annual meeting, something that's like maybe 2 hours long, hosted at the Arts Council or maybe somewhere else, just to talk over everyone's needs and figure out what we can be doing to better serve you, I think that would be a great idea. But I'm not going to, we as an Arts Council are not going to force that if it's not what the grantees need.
Could the funding provided from the Folklife Network grant partially fund the staff person who will be the representative?
Yes. Okay, so can we spend Folklife Network grant money on staffing? Absolutely. And it can be used to fund part of a position. It could be used to fund an entire position. If you feel like $50,000 would best be spent to hire a Folklife specialist, then we would encourage you to do that. I do want to point out also that it is allowed, salary is an allowable expense, and so are wages and fringe. So all of that is okay.
Do you imagine these new centers living in already existing buildings and or in partnership with existing nonprofits, or will these be brand new entities?
Any of those possibilities is okay. In our 3 new regional Folklife centers, I imagine that we probably will get a lot of applications from already existing entities who want to, dedicate a certain aspect of their annual activities to Folklife, and that's great. If there's some very wealthy individual or group out there who wants to build a new building in Talbot County and call it the Upper Shore Folklife Center, we're certainly not going to argue with that. We would help to fund that as well. The idea of partnership, though, I think is really wise. That's a very smart way to think about acquiring a grant like this, because it is so heavily oriented toward networking, So you're getting a $50,000 a year Folklife Network grant. Great. What are you doing to serve other organizations in their community who might not, for example, have the same access as your organization to getting this kind of funding? So lateral partnerships are really great. I can tell you, for example, that our existing Folklife Network, Regional Folklife Center at Frostburg State University, they're doing a lot of collaborating with the Main Street group there called Frostburg First, and that has been a good lateral partnership for them. So, I'll give people a little more time to type if there are more questions. I would say that for anyone that has questions, detailed questions about how to get an idea like this off the ground, how to, strategize to become a member of the Folklife Network, you'd really want to get in touch with the folks down at St. Mary's College of Maryland. So in a couple of seconds, most of you have my contact information already, but in a couple of seconds, I'll put it on the screen, and I would encourage you to reach out to me after the webinar, and I can put you in touch with those people at St. Mary's College, because they've been doing remarkable coalition building over the last 2 years to really establish their regional Folklife Center internally. All the focus has been internal in this first little while. And it's not all about just gathering the cultural workers and the artists in the same room. It's about gathering the deans, the administrators, the members of local arts agencies that aren't directly connected to the college. It's been about, remaining in fairly regular touch with my office and asking questions and, inviting me to convenings and things like this. They've been doing really good work, and I feel like it's, in many cases, a replicable way of doing business. So I'm happy to share contact info for anyone that's interested. Okay, heading on to my contact info. There it is. Thank you very much for your kind attention. There's 1 email address and 2 phone numbers. Email is best by far. I am most responsive there. And just want to say thank you so much for being here today, and that this is really the broad strokes. So go to our website, read the guidelines, use my contact information, and I hope to talk to some of you soon. Thank you so much. And I will stay on the line for 5 minutes or so in case people have kind of lingering questions. But let's call this the official end of the webinar. All right. Thank you so much.